we put this together back in February, we kind of thought that, well, the second wave would be over, you know, people would be a little relaxed, and we're all buried in even Nova Scotia's in the third wave now. So we're all, anyways, hopefully this is a little distraction from COVID and helps you kind of think down the road. So really, thanks again for all participation. And just want to say that this session, of course, is just really still the beginning. And like I said at the beginning of this, all the 4 sessions, really the group of faculty and the group of participants, we all are really together on this building a leadership group. So anyways, I think we'll get started because we have a very busy program, as we always do. We want to make sure we have lots of time for discussion, especially in this last session where we're trying to pull some themes together. So I do want to start off with an important land acknowledgement, and this is from Halifax, from Nova Scotia. We'd like to begin by acknowledging we are in the Mi'kma'ki, the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. We're all treaty people. This is actually an area where there was no treaty. So that makes for some very interesting discussions. So we have, I think, can everyone see my screen is up? I'll go to my slideshow. Can you see that okay? And you
Perfect.
can hear? Okay. All right. So just to remind everybody, these are our learning objectives. Some of you submitted some issues or problems that you wanted us to solve and or discuss, so we're going to do that. And we do have, this is a journal club, and you should have received, we had 2 articles that were pre-circulated and another 2 articles that we sent out just this week because they are copyrighted. So just wanted to give them to you and urge you not to share them, just use them for your own use. Because there is actually literature on leadership, and we wanted to introduce you to that and discuss it. And again, and we'll have lots of discussion in this session, but do want to kind of pull it all together and summarize some of the themes that we've heard. So we're going to start off with I'm going to facilitate the first part of the meeting and just have discussion on a couple of cases, and then I have a few slides together of some themes that we can discuss in more detail. So I think with my slides, I can't see the chat now, so I'll look to Lois or Eric to prompt me as we go along on this. So again, just for disclosure, there's no relationship with financial sponsors for any of our speakers today. So let's go to the first case, and this is a case that came from one of the registrants, and it could be a case any of you had. So really want to hear some discussion on this one. I'll just, you can read it, but just the sense of this is, like many of you, recruiting in emergency medicine is an ongoing challenge. And to one particular department, after many years, they finally recruited a full complement, which is pretty exciting. And believe it or not, with this complement, all the emerge shifts are going to be full, which has never happened before. And there's no retirements, and there's not even any mat leaves, although those can happen, but it looks like the mat leaves have been all filled. And they've just hired 4 new recruits that are all going to start within the next 6 months. So very exciting. So what happened though, is literally a week after the last offer went out, the chief learned about the availability of a new trainee who will graduate next year. And the new trainee is highly qualified. Actually, they're training away, as we say in the Maritimes, they're away, but they're coming home. They're coming back to the local area, and this candidate is an African Canadian. So let's open it for discussion on this case. I guess the first question is, I mean, there's no openings. Would you actually advertise? Would you actually have a competition for the position that actually doesn't exist? So let's open it up for some discussion. And as I said, I can't see the chat. I'll be depending on others to kind of pipe up or watch that for me. Okay, I see that. Okay, Heather, go ahead. What do you think?
And we just went through the hiring process. So this is an interesting case for us. So one of the first things I think that I would think about would be presenting this to the group. Like, what are everybody's plans for the next couple of years? Like, is there anybody that wants to take a big leave of absence that they've never been allowed to do ever? I don't know. Are there, is there anything the group feels about having this? And is there something about this hire that the group feels like, boy, we should really take advantage of this? And is that person wanting to stay in the area? I mean, I don't know. We don't know anything about this person really, other than the one line. So I'd start it with that. How's that?
Yeah. Has anyone ever actually had too many emergency doctors for very long? People worry about, okay, Eric, you have, go ahead.
Yeah, so scheduling and stuff is part of my job. And I, like, for the first 15 years of my career, it was always, well, we're a little short. Everyone's got 1 or 2 extra shifts this block because we don't have enough people. And we aimed for and finally got up to 110% capacity. And invariably, there's always someone who's sick, pregnant, leave, traveling, whatever it is, and stuff. And so, you know, I think initially there was a little bit of a, oh, I'm going to be down a shift. I want 10 shifts a month or 12 or whatever, and I'm actually losing a bit. But once people saw how it worked, saw how easy it was then to give up shifts if you needed to switch a shift or get rid of a shift at the last minute, because everyone now has flexibility. So there was a little bit of a I wouldn't say back. There's a little bit of a pushback at first, or concern about, well, do we have too many people and not enough work, and so I'm going to losing income. The bigger picture after we've done it, and we've had it for a couple of years now, is that people actually like having the flexibility. Certainly in our group, it's big enough that you can always count on something unexpected, be it an illness or a pregnancy or a leave, and so to have flexibility has become really, really helpful for people.
Great.
And, you know, you get back to the wellness part, really, really good. And so having gone through what I've gone through, I'd say, go for it, hire this person. People in 6 or 8 months will see the benefit of having some flexibility in the system.
Thanks, Eric. I'm going to go to Rod, then Lois, then Julian. So go ahead, Rod.
Okay, I'll actually put my hand down because I really wanted to hear from from everyone else. But I was going to say was that just quickly, it's interesting how, especially when it has to do with money or the threat of a change in stability, that some of the hidden importance and culture of the group comes through. So I've found in the past, even how someone is hired and how the decision is made is sometimes very opaque, and all those kind of little micro things that happen within your group in terms of what the process is and how much is it democracy, is it consultation, all those things kind of perk up through when you have these kind of special situations. And hopefully if the culture of the group has always been transparent and trusting, you can have these kind of conversations and look for a win-win. I know when we had a plethora of staff, but we had great people who were in the pipeline, and it's hard to recruit great people. We introduced a sabbatical program, which basically allows one person to be away per month. And it's been like life-changing. There's no way we'd go back to without sabbaticals. So sometimes there's a creative solution.
Thanks, Rod. Go ahead, Lois.
So what we've done here, and we have a smaller group, 15 physicians, and we have 2-3 peripheral hospitals further down the valley. So Soldiers is 45 minutes away, and Digby is an hour and 20 minutes away. So we have circulated some of our group through those, the ones who wanted to. You didn't have to go, but it spread the shifts around to sites that were short. And I did one of my favorite things, which is work in different places is always interesting. Thanks.
Great. Julian, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. We have a little bit of a larger group. I think there's about 40 of us, and we all whine a little bit when there's a little bit less coverage and we all have to work a bit over our EFT. And I think that the reverse of that is that this is probably something where for a good candidate, we would just come to the group and say, look, between 40 of us, if we wanted to give them a 1.0, that's like 0.025 of an EFT down. It's maybe a shift in 4 months. Like, you're going to need to get over yourself and just do this. I also think that we, particularly at least locally, and I bet you nationally, have probably not done a great job with equity, diversity, and inclusion historically. And I think that there is a very important prerogative for us to be better at that. And so this gives us a great opportunity to diversify our workplace. And I think we would I would hope that we would find a way to make this work in this circumstance.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. And I would tell you that this group, and this is a real case, is has excellent gender diversity, but it's completely white. Yeah, Heather.
I have a question, actually. So I think it was Eric that said they had 110. They're like 110%, basically equivalent. So what does the faculty believe is the ideal over percentage?
That's kind of what the department head and myself sort of thought as we're about 95 docs in total. So if we thought, okay, there's always seems to be a couple pregnancy leaves or parental leaves or whatever leaves. All right, that brings us down this much. And when we calculated the number of shifts, that seemed to come out to being a reasonable guesstimate. We got up to about 112 or 113% at one point, but then we got back down again. Someone left or got, so that just seemed to be the target based on shifts. And again, you get back to, okay, how many shifts is this going to cost me? And then you're like, oh, well, that's nothing when it's spread out over a larger number of docs. So
Thanks, Eric. Uma, let's go to you. And then Sarah, then Heather again. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo a lot of what's being said in terms of like bringing the conversation to the group to get a feel for the group. I think oftentimes we hesitate because we put our own lenses on what people are thinking rather than actually cultivating an environment of like psychological safety where people can truly contribute. And I think engaging in a conversation with the group where there is safety to be able to share. Oftentimes there'll be somebody who shows up and like even presented the case like, guys, we're already hired, and like, just having that negative stance as opposed to presenting it as, here is what the situation is. How can we creatively work towards coming up with a solution to accommodate? Even the presentation style, I think is important. And, I'm always an advocate for using liberating structures and facilitated dialogue so that everybody can safely share without being influenced by, the person who's leading the conversation.
Excellent. Yeah. And I you're absolutely right. I mean, I framed this a certain way to encourage discussion, but you're absolutely right. Yeah. Sarah, go ahead.
Hi, guys. So I'm coming from a group where we're 40 docs and we're chronically understaffed. And in Quebec, we can't hire even enough to staff our emergency completely, which is frustrating. So from our perspective in my group, I mean, this kind of thing would be amazing because, I mean, number one, we talked about wellness. So being able to have people have time off and spend time with their families, et cetera, by not having to fill in all the extra shifts. Secondly, so much unpredictability. Like we've had a physician go off on sick leave and so many different maternity leaves. We're down 7 or 8 staff this summer just from all these leaves that are so unpredictable. And then third, it also opens up a lot of space for people to do more academic things, right? Like if in your department you want people to be more engaged in committees and engaged in research, et cetera, it's hard to do that when everybody's chronically overworked. So to have extra staffing, I think, is a big benefit to a group, especially an academic group.
Yeah, I'm going to get to Kirk in a second. I'm just going to pose a question to think about. So I think the consensus is we can create a safety space. We want to recruit. So how do we make that recruit successful? I'll go to you, Kirk. You may have another question. Please answer, but I just wanted you guys to think about that. If we decide to recruit a Black Canadian into our group that's all white, are there things we should do differently? Are there things we need to think about? But Kirk, I'll let you ask your question or your comment first.
Well, it may be kind of maybe related. Like I think I heard people talking about, going to the group and asking, how does this person sort of fit? And that always kind of worries me a little bit. I think, one of the reasons we are a particularly uniform group is because we've worried a lot in emergency medicine, not just, in hiring staff, but I think in looking at how we match residents, about how people fit. And I think when that's high on the list of your selection criteria, you end up getting, much the same. And I'll look to Doug. When Doug hired me, I still remember one of the first questions I was asked on my interview. It wasn't from Doug, it was from someone else on the interview panel. And they asked me if I played hockey. And the second question was, what position do you play? And, you know, it was kind of funny at the time, you know, 22 years ago, but it does kind of bring, you know, more of the same. And so I think, you know, this kind of relates to the question that I think when you do hire people in the group, you know, there is I think the group has some obligation, if you want that person to be successful, to provide mentorship. I don't think it's enough to say, well, you know, here's your ID badge, and here's where the lockers are, and you know, and here's your parking pass, you know, come to work. I think you do need to have mentors that are there not just to guide them about, you know, how things work in the hospital, but about their career path early on and how they integrate, you know, into that hospital, into the group, into the community. I don't think we can assume that this is all things that people are going to get just automatically.
Great point. Great, thank you. See some nodding of heads there. Any other comments on the? I'll just go to the kind of next slide. Just again, the talking points. I think we really covered that. I agree completely. I mean, I've never seen an emergency department overstaffed, and you know, you should always. I think the principle is one always wants to proceed on recruiting excellent candidates. Again, we talked about the, you know, how transparent is the recruiting process? You know, is there a committee? Is there input? Is there recommendation? How is it actually done? I think Kirk's word about fit, man, that's a loaded word, isn't it? Very loaded. So we have to, you know, we're committed to diversity. We have to be active about it. I know there's a great symposium coming up at the Cape meeting into this. I think, and Huma alluded to this about readiness, right? If you have a big group, introduce the conversation. I mean, the department chief might be way ahead on this as the rest of the group. So having that conversation what are we prepared in this regard? And we always prepare to be surprised. You guys know when you got a group of 20, 30, or even Lois, as you say, a group of 15, I mean, the variance of opinions on this one is tremendous. So, anyways, I think we've covered lots of great points in that. Anything else anyone wants to say in this case? Okay, let's go to another one. This is professionalism, always a big issue we have. So this is again a kind of compilation kind of case. So a senior emergency physician has longstanding issues with, shall we call them off-color remarks, interactions, been going on for years, often with nursing staff. It is a male physician, I have to say. And then you're the chief, so you go back and look at the file, right? Everyone's got a file, and it's completely empty. There's been no documentation, there's no note to the file, completely empty. And then you meet this physician to review behavior. He becomes offended, states he provides great care, and then his humor. It's a stressful environment. His humor has always been, everyone says that it just reduces stress. So I don't have to make this stuff up, do I? So let's have some comments, like if you're a chief or you're a deputy chief, or like what are your thoughts, any approach? I know that these are always uncomfortable, no matter how experienced you are. Like when you run into these things, you wish that it had already been dealt with by somebody else, and it usually hasn't. Comments from folks?
I can start, Doug. I was going to say these are very difficult situations because they really do show the lack of consistency amongst the institution to actually take a stand about behavior. Most of the time, this is rampant and has never been touched or touched very superficially. So I know this has been a big challenge. I think a lot of it comes to really taking the time to make sure we understand truly the situation, whether good or bad. In terms of, you know, the depth of it or whatnot. I have found that one of the hardest things to do was just to actually absolutely draw a line in the sand and make it very clear what is acceptable and not acceptable behavior in a way that is tried to be collaborative with the person. I've been surprised at times where someone I thought would be a very difficult conversation, we've actually developed great relationship, and the person has shown a lot of growth. And when I text them, they sometimes say, "Oh my God, what did I do now?" And we talk about it, or there's nothing. So in that case, and then there's some that are very resistant to change. And I think you have to draw a line and say, this is acceptable behavior and this is not acceptable behavior, and this is what will happen if this recurs. But this is a brutal situation.
Yeah, Mike, go ahead. You had your hand up.
I've come across this a couple times.
Even in
My lord.
Newfoundland.
What?
Even in Newfoundland.
You can imagine. So I'm the academic chair, but the thing is that how people act in the clinical setting when you're a person who interacts with other staff and nurses, of course, but also with students, affects your academic appointment, and that affects your interaction with the university, which is mandatory. So we've seen this before with residents, of course, and if people don't write their comments down, then it's hard to go back to the resident and say much to them or remediate them. Similar with faculty and staff, particularly, I wanted to say, when you're a fairly young person in a leadership position, which I am, but I've moved up through and become a leader, whereas before people were, I guess, senior to me. And now I've got to address problems that come up with them, whereas previously I was junior. So I found that very challenging. And the way I've dealt with it is just head on, like sit down, like this is what I've heard. This is what could possibly come of this if it's not dealt with. And what do you think? What are you going to do, kind of thing. From an academic, I can't say too specifically, but the complaining person held back from putting in a very formal complaint that could have basically blown the roof off the place. If you understand what that means, it would have just caused a whole lot of trouble if the problem wasn't dealt with the problem physician. It was dealt with, they backed off, it seemed to be fine afterwards. But a few issues come up, and not the least of which is the seniority.
Yeah, great comment. And, you know, it's interesting, sometimes when you confront this kind of behavior that's been for so long, I mean, I'm not sure I totally believe this, but sometimes the physician will say, you know what, no one's ever said that to me before. And you sort of go like how obvious is it? Like, of course, but I think that probably does. Like nobody, you get all these workarounds, and no one ever actually comes down, sits down and says X, Y, and Z, this is what's happening here. But yeah, self-awareness, right? Lois, comment.
So I have learned in starting a conversation like this, I will now say, this is what I've heard. What's your take? Because when I was younger, I would go and I would say, you have to stop doing X. And they say, well, I didn't do that, you know, so I've lost the ability to educate them and bring them forward right off the bat because they're annoyed with me right away. I also find that the age of people, as your case points out, senior physicians do this more, and I'm getting to be one of them, than younger people who are perhaps a bit more aware of how culture has changed. I think it's really important to tackle it. If you don't, it will just fester underneath and it will come back to haunt you again and again.
I think that's a really good point, Lois. I mean, I can tell you that when you get into these issues, you can spend a lot of time, right? It's a lot of energy and emotional energy. But I mean, most of us can tell you, if you do this well, then the message gets out, right? I mean, it's all confidential, like you have one-on-one conversation, a plan, but the message gets out that it's unacceptable behavior to the team, and it has a tremendous payoff in the end, but it is brutal. Yeah, Lisa, go ahead.
Just a question, I guess, like I wonder if it's probably helpful to, as a leader, to encourage people to know about different ways where you could seek help or potentially like lodge a complaint. But on the flip side, that maybe turns things into like snitching, right? and divisive amongst your group, because it's frustrating if a file is empty when there's been like anecdotal and events over years, and then you have nothing factual to really act on. So how do you balance that?
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. I'll get to another slide in a second where it gives a few suggestions, is the advantage we have now that we didn't have years ago. There's actually clear policies around this, right? So whatever your provincial college is, it's very clear now, and every hospital you work in has a code of conduct. So what's really helpful, you can actually go back to those documents, and and those documents don't say be nice to people. I mean, they're really clear about what's behavior is not tolerated, and you can bring that now. So it gives you kind of data and so a place to start that we really didn't have years ago. So I think that's been a huge plus to use those actual policies to kind of frame what's acceptable. And we're not trying to change people's inner personality, right? We're just trying to say, you can be whatever you like, but you have to behave in a certain way. That's what's acceptable. I think Mike made a great point that our students coming up, like this is what they expect, and we need to model that behavior. Other comments from folks?
There was a great editorial in the Globe and Mail by Gillian Horton about the days of accepting because they're a good surgeon are over, and I think there definitely is a culture change. It's not good enough that you're excellent clinically, that we look over these shortcomings. I'll put the link in the chat.
That'd be great. Gillian Horton, we had rounds on her in Nova Scotia, and man, she is very thoughtful person, written a book, has all kinds of interesting experiences to share. Yeah, Julian, go ahead.
Yeah, Jillian's a Winnipegger, and it's great to have her advocating voice here and elsewhere. The thing that sometimes gives me a bit of cognitive difficulty is this idea that we may still want to find ways to attempt to remediate behavior sort of behind closed doors. Look, you're doing something wrong, you need to change this around. And I wonder how much of that is a leftover from the days where we felt like we were untouchable and we didn't have to follow the rules that our students are following these days because we could sort of police ourselves. And do we perpetuate this power differential by trying to sort of solve problems kind of, I don't know, solving them in a way that is pretty casually, try and make the change. I don't want to blow the top off the building. Let's just let's see if we can make this right on the inside and keep ourselves out of trouble as a big organization. And I don't know how to find the balance to that, and wondered what some of you folks thought about that.
Yeah, I think, and we'll get to that in the next slide, but it is the graded response, right? So the first response is what we've talked about, sitting down in a private conversation, like Lois says, what's going on? Tell me, let's have some facts. And sometimes there's other factors, right? We've had a couple of instances where we turned out you scratch the surface, and it turns out the personal life of this physician is in a complete tailspin. And there's other factors, but there's a graded response, right, Julie? You go through that and you lay out what needs to happen, and Eric's lived that with his role. And then there's a next phase that's more formal, absolutely. Because I think in the past we would have the quiet conversations, but it never went any further. Other comments from other folks?
I have a question for you, Doug, or people. What do you think about anonymous people who complain, but it's anonymous versus like in writing? I used to believe in the anonymous, and I've really gone away from it.
Yeah, that is a really tough one, because then to be fair to the individual, like what have they got to deal with? That's a really tough one. I think. But what we have to do, I think we heard from you and Huma in our last one, we have to create psychological safety, right? There has to be a safe space where there is a power differential. Junior physicians, trainees, nurses, they have to feel comfortable bringing those forward, and by writing them down, that it'll be dealt with appropriately. So I think we need a document, but we need to create this. If we don't have a culture of psychological safety, you're right, it's not going to happen. Mike, go ahead again.
Yeah, I just think the anonymous comments are probably not helpful. Just thinking of when we do reviews and stuff for physician promotions or basically second terms of their positions, you can't take an anonymous comment because it could be much worse than it really would be if somebody had to stick their name on it.
Yeah.
And it's like online stuff. People will say all kinds of stuff on Twitter or whatever, but if you actually got to put your name to it, they're going to be much more meek and mild.
Yeah, good point. So just to show up a few points that we've already discussed, and I should actually, the last point on the slide is actually, I should have had it first. So what I always say to chiefs or other folks is, what is your goal? So is the goal for the physician who has a difficulty, is it to rehab them or make them better? Or frankly, is the goal that they should leave? Because I think you need to decide what your goal is first. And it's going to take time to achieve either of those goals, but not to confuse. And sometimes you might not know what the goal is. So like we said, documentation, very important. And sometimes if you can institute regular meetings or reviews with all your physicians, then it's not a big deal. If every 6 months you're meeting with the docs, you say, you know, by the way, something came, like it's not a special meeting, it comes up as part of the normal process. I talked about professionalism policy guidelines. There's all kinds of them now, and they're very specific. We talked about a graded response, so we'll get to that just in another piece of the case as to where you go next. There's all kinds of specific tools out there. I'll try to find the reference on the Pulse 360. It is a great tool. It's run by I have no proprietary involvement. It's run by a psychologist from Florida. He's been doing it for 25 years for physicians. And the great thing about it is a 360 review that people do, but then it goes through a report card and it gives the doctor specific things to do. So it's really good for physicians because we respond, like if you say be nicer, you don't know what that means, but it says, you know, when you come to work, smile and say hello. Do not use the F word. Like it's really clear and then it tells you if you pass or fail. And then, because physicians want to do well, right? So it's actually a great little tool. I'll get the reference, I apologize, and put it in place. So just a few things we kind of covered. So again, a couple of other little things. So what about when patient care is at risk? Fortunately, that's not very often. But remember, if you're the chief or you're the deputy chief, the reason you're appointed by the hospital is this is your job, right? I mean, if you think there's patient care risk involved, then absolutely you have to ensure safety for patients. So, and you should consider, I think we don't do this enough. We worry about, you know, privileges and lawyers coming down at us. But if you really think there's a problem, then absolutely there needs to be works. The person can't come to work. They need to be suspended. Remember, there's a process that'll happen through your bylaws. Obviously, you need to work with your chief of staff or VP medicine, but if you're worried that patient care is at risk, you should not hesitate consulting your VP medicine, and you put the person off work. I'll never forget sitting down with a surgeon, a senior surgeon, saying, you can't operate anymore, patients are at risk. And I tell you, I was nervous doing that. And he nodded his head and he said, okay. And then we had a huge legal process that went on for a few years. But the important thing was, I was confident that patients were not at risk. Remember that the trouble we have, of course, is physicians have privileges at our hospital. Like it's not like a staff you can say, I'm going to put you off, you know, on paid work leave. Like we have either a big stick or nothing. And that's why you need a kind of a graded response, because withdrawing privileges is complicated and it's like a pathway. I want to bring up this reporting to the college because sometimes you'll see that people will say, okay, I'll resign if you don't report me to the college. Or I've even had a CMP lawyer say that to me and they're not supposed to. So remember that reporting to your professional college, that's your job to make a decision on based on what you see. And then the college works it through. Never use it as a negotiation. I've said to physicians, we'll sort this out. It's my decision to report this to the college based on X, Y, and Z. So that's important. And actually, you know, CMPA in the past were pretty, when it came to privileges or physician behavior, they pretty much like legal stuff. They had a scorched earth policy. I don't know what you guys have found. I found that that experience has changed quite a bit in the last few years. I had a couple of physicians that were really had all kinds of both medical and professional issues. And the reason that they stepped away from practice is because their CMP lawyer told them to do it. So that's a bit of a change because it wasn't always that way. So just, I mean, can be very complicated when you get into this. You absolutely need help because it's complicated, but it can work very successfully. And when you do one of these for these very difficult situations that may involve patient care, I tell you, the payoff is tremendous because you've done the right thing. The message gets out there. People know that you're taking responsibility and accountability. Anyone have any comments on this? I mean, we could talk for hours on this, but it's a bit daunting at times.
So Doug, I'll just say that you don't have to do it by yourself. You're not doing all this. You will have a group of people that will support you, support your work. Even if it's just 2 or 3, it's not your whole group. But it's not that you have to carry that banner and do all this legal, probably maybe practice defining change.
Doug.
Yeah,
Doug,
go ahead, John.
I had one question about one of the more frequent thing that comes up at both places that I work would be, I think the policies are a little clearer when it comes to physician, behavior and lack of professionalism. But my bigger problem is when it becomes allied health or nursing with trainees, allied health with other physicians, and just because they have their unions and we're not their managers. So I find that particularly frustrating and difficult to try to get any headway with, and then it comes across as it's doctors versus, in this case, nurses, which is not helpful for anybody. Anyway.
Yeah, it's a really important point, John. So when that happens, usually policies are fairly explicit that HR does the kind of work to kind of collect the information, but absolutely the VP Medicine Chief of Staff is absolutely involved in that, and that you do it together, you do the investigations together. I usually, physicians are very nervous being interviewed by HR people from the hospital, so I usually do that myself. But I have the HR person because they know all the union rules. And again, usually you work through it all together, but you're right, it can be complicated. You have to do it together. And what I always say to Allied Health, I said, listen, the same code of conduct applies to physicians, but how you deal with them is different because they're not employees. And I think once you explain that, it helps a little bit. But I agree, sometimes Allied Health or nursing, they feel, well, the doctor's got a special deal. And that's just not so, but it's a perception, absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up. Okay, so what I wanted to do is just kind of cover off some kind of general things from some of the feedback we got, and then we're going to go in just a few minutes into our journal club. So as you could probably guess, I've told you I'm a hospital administrator, masquerading as an emerge doc. I've had VP medicine job 3 times. So I thought I'd just give you a couple of tips from the hospital administrator from 25 years, kind of, how to kind of get stuff done. And these are probably not evidence-based, but anyways, maybe you'll find them helpful. Because I know some of you ask questions like, how do you step up into leadership? What actually works? So, over my years in these kind of positions, like doctors coming in, pounding on the desk saying, people are going to die, like the sky is falling, like that just, it makes you feel bad, but it just doesn't work. But I must say the number of physicians that come to my office with actually a very defined problem and a solution, like it's few and far between. So when that actually happens, it's actually kind of a relief. So you have to define your problem and a solution. And most of us, even though we're in the hospital a long time, we really don't know how the place works in terms of, hiring and budgets and everything. So try to find a co-lead. That might be your nurse manager. That might be a director. It's somebody that you can work with. So that's kind of a team approach. And number 3 is absolutely true. Like when an administrator tells you there is no money, it's not true. It's just that there's no money for you. So like there's always money, but you have to frame it in such, like there's not millions of dollars, even if you're in Alberta, but there is money, but you just have to unlock it to get someone interested. And that's absolutely true. No administrator will ever admit that, but I'm telling you. What you should do when you have something you want to get done, ask for some project management support. So for example, most health administration schools have health admin students who are really smart, who are learning to be administrators, and they often have to do practicums at hospitals. Find out who they are, get them assigned to whatever your project is, because they can write proposals, they can do stuff that you have an idea, but you can't kind of write a proposal of how to get money and get stuff. And they are unbelievable. Or just ask your hospital, listen, I need a little bit of help, a little bit of admin support to get this done. Always ask for a pilot project, right? We're famous in Canada for pilot projects, because then the administration isn't committing to anything permanent. But guess what? If it's really successful, they don't even notice after a while. And sometimes administrators will ask you for a business plan, like that sounds really scientific. Most of the time, they have no idea what they're asking for. So again, your kind of smart admin person will help you. A big source can be foundation donors, right? Remember, donors, they love to talk to doctors. And when you have a really innovative idea, you get a little donor support, like that's gold. So a couple of other little tips. So never say that a project will decrease ED volumes, right? Because like provinces have spent billions of dollars to reduce ED volumes. None of that stuff works. So don't even go there. And never say that you'll reduce ED visits or inpatient visits will actually save money. Remember, because if you reduce the number of patients going into the hospital, you only save money if you close the beds and lay off the staff, right? There's always another patient to go in the bed. So don't even say that because it's just not true. Focus on the right thing for patient care and have something kind of really kind of tight and focused. Another good trick is start halfway through the fiscal year. So what that means is you actually don't need as much money. So if you start something in September, you don't need much money if you're hiring staff. And by the time March comes around, your administrator is so excited that they'll find twice as much money for the next year. You think I'm making this stuff up, it's true. So be persistent. Remember, like those of you who might know Shannon McPhee in Nova Scotia, she never gives up and she gets stuff done. So finally, remember a well-defined project with a reasonable budget. I picked, 50K or less. Obviously that depends on your size of your hospital. I mean, you'll get funded if you have some clear outcomes. Anyways, those are my little tips. I did want to have another, we don't have time for that. I think I do want to put this slide up though, before we go to our journal club, because a number of you have asked us as a group, like, where do I start? Like I look at Eddie Lang, like he's the chief of this massive department. I'm kind of interested in that, but is there kind of a stepping stone along the way? How do I get there? So there actually are a number of things. So I have to promote CAPE, right? CAPE has all kinds of committees and task force of like-minded people. You can really learn a lot and then kind of demonstrate your leadership ability doing work of things that you really like. Some people have got involved in emerged health records implementation. Those are actually really good projects. You learn a lot, but be careful, man. That's change management. That is a tough one to bite off, but you can learn a lot. I think a couple of you there are involved in medical staff associations. So you're working with other physicians and other leadership opportunities. So that can help you. Often, if you're the head of a medical staff association, you're on the hospital board. So you get to meet lots of interesting people. I know some of you do this, but do not volunteer to review patient complaints. Like that is like, it'll just eat you up. So don't put up your hand when they ask you for that. Remember our previous sessions, right? Leads. I think leads is a great model. It starts with lead yourself. So do stuff that you really care about and understand what your limitations are. Don't take on too much stuff that you can't solve. And I talked about foundation. So those are just a few little things, a few little kind of thoughts that I've been listening to the last 4 weeks. I think we've got a few minutes just if people have thoughts or comments on this, and then we'll move into our journal club. I don't know if there's anything in it.
Doug, can I ask you a question?
Go ahead.
So, your department head obviously has to work with the CEO of the hospital and a senior admin within the hospital, but then also has to manage their group. Right. And sometimes the troops are getting restless because senior admin or the hospital isn't, getting all the stuff done that the troops want to get done. So there's two questions, I guess, here, actually. How do you, like the department head negotiating on behalf of the troops, but realizing that they can't ask and get everything? And second of all, do you think it's worthwhile that maybe have, some rabble rousers within the group who are, raising the flags and complaining to the CEO and senior admin on behalf of the troops, that then allows the department head to continue working with everybody else to try and get stuff done?
Yeah, it's a really good
then
point,
that
Eric.
that working relationship is, sorry?
It's a really good point. I mean, as a chief, or those of you who have admin roles, you absolutely have to have a good relationship with whatever your hospital administration is, and with media and the public. And that is a fine line, right? Because many of the frontline physicians will say, well, you're just another suit, you're an administration sellout. Like, how do you get that balance? And it's tough. Some people have done that by having like deputy chiefs of sharing the responsibility, so they kind of balance these things off. Some of it is kind of the personality, like how can you have the right personality that connects to the frontline staff on a one-to-one basis and listens and responds, it's visible. So it's tough. It's interesting, you know, I've tried, I'm not good at it, to try to, you know, accept divergent opinions all the time, because any group, you're absolutely right, you're going to have some that love to push the envelope, that don't really like administration. Like, how do you actually capture the nuggets that they have and make it useful? I do worry about that if they're going around you to hospital administration. I mean, that can be extremely disruptive to everybody. And what happens is the loud voice that does that, they get frustrated because in fact, they don't actually get anything done. They just get themselves frustrated. So it's a tough one. I hopefully you can manage all that together and find the kind of sweet spot. Other comments or questions before we move to our journal code? Okay, so we'll have lots of chats and discussion on that. So we are going to, as I said, we want to illustrate some of the literature, much of which is actually outside medical literature on leadership. So we have actually 4 articles. That's a lot to cover in 45 minutes. The first 2 Eric's going to review, and then the second 2 Lois is going to cover. So I know you've seen them all, and I'm going to turn it over first to Eric to talk about our first 2 articles. So what do I do? Nothing? You guys, you share the Carol Ann.
Yeah, I just took over.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. So we have 2 nice review articles, and I'm just going to go very quickly. I'm not going to say too much, just to sort of generate and allow for some discussion afterwards. And I kind of pulled what I think my limited experience, sort of tips that are kind of practical at the end from the 2 articles to sort of for you to think about and consider. So the first article is from the Mayo Clinic, and it really sort of documents and outlines like an overarching big picture theme to promoting engagement and reducing burnout in an organization. And it's a big organization with lots of resources, thousands of doctors, and lots of money, it looks like. And it's pretty cutting edge what they've done, or what they're doing. Sorry, code STEMI at my hospital. So, you know, I love this diagram, just, you know, from showing you both the ethical or the moral sort of imperative to helping your coworkers, but also then how it can help in the workplace as well. And if you're really worried about efficiency or quality of care, how promoting wellness, preventing burnout can be such a helpful and important thing, right? They sort of outlined a number of the drivers of burnout and engagement. And so it allows you to sort of consider different things. What's popping up now? What can I do to work on those specific areas? I kind of like that. And they kind of end with a bunch of tips and ideas about where to work from. And, you know, obviously, if you don't know about the problem, you don't even acknowledge it exists, you're never going to get better at it, of course, right? And so, you know, we had, I'm going to say, we're almost 2 years since we implemented an EMR. The hospital did turn the switch at 2 a.m. And we went from a smattering of different things, including paper records, to a complete EMR for a massive hospital, right? So we've got 3 hospitals, thousands of doctors, over 1,000 inpatient beds. So it was a big job. We switched over, and we were already very busy and very crowded. Those are 2 different things to me, and our department just got destroyed. A month and a half later, we were struggling, and people in my group were really unhappy. And so our CEO, because of all of the complaining, actually ended up having a town hall where he kind of sat down or sat in front of a large group of very engaged and very irate physicians and nurses and staff, looking at what was happening in our department and how we could go and make it better. And it was a good example, I think, of, you know, not just emailing that, yep, I'm aware there's a problem, but actually sitting there and taking it as a leader. And he did a nice job of it. And then using his leadership skills to then sort of, okay, here's how we're going to try and get this better and get it improved. And some of those things worked and some of them didn't. You can imagine when you're trying to change a big organization. You know, as someone working in my own little area, I think of implemented things. So where's the problem? What's the issue? And how can we fix it? Is there something in particular that's really stressing people out or causing people to sort of hate their job or be frustrated with their job? Is it stocking of supplies? You can never find a suture tray. Is it your EMR, right? And so anyone who's introduced and then works with an EMR knows the good and the bad, and the bad is well documented when you read up on it. We actually went so far, we obviously had people who helped train super users who at the start, but we've actually gone on and had some super users, and we actually pay them to go and help people. Even if it's spending 2 hours with them, teaching them shortcuts, how to put in smart phrases, how to use all the things that are there to actually make their lives easier. And it actually is quite helpful. There are people that are great with EMRs, that are more natural with them, and people who really struggle with them. And it was just one area where, from a wellness point of view, if you can make your use of that EMR easier, it's just so much easier at the end of your shift, how stressed you feel. Cultivate a community at work. And so, you know, that can be social events, that can be, you know, getting together for rounds and teaching and things. One of our nice things that we did pre-pandemic, every year we'd have this big retreat. We'd go off to Montebello, which is this beautiful chateau up the river from us. It's a nice hotel, and we actually paid for everyone who could go to stay there. And we'd have a few little event teaching sessions, mostly non-academic stuff. And then just socializing, to actually get to hang out with people and see people and, you know, meet their spouses and kids and things. And it really just helps cultivate you know, we're colleagues and we're friends, and really helps cultivate that feeling. Rewards and incentives, I think they talk about this and how there is no for sure right answer. And it's a good question. You know, in particular, people think of finances for this, and it's really tricky trying to decide fee for service, hourly rate, some combination thereof. Do you reward productivity during your clinical shifts? I don't know that there's a right answer, but every group will have a culture that is there for a reason. And I say that because, you know, people who really want to go and do fee for service work are going to go to places that have fee for service. People that are really concerned about teaching are going to go to places like where I work, where it's an hourly rate, and changing that can be a real challenge. Make sure, you know, if you have values or a mission statement, that what you're doing and the decisions you're making align with that and are on message all the time. Flexibility and life integration. I don't know, work life, I don't know, work is part of my life. It's all part of my life. I think of it all as all of one. And the more flexible you can be, the more you allow people to sort of meet their own specific needs, the happier your group is going to be. We have people that only do nights. We have people that pick up weekends or whatever, and we allow and promote all of that to some degree to try and keep everyone happy. Every department, I think, now has wellness groups. Most hospitals have it. They try and measure it to some degree. I don't know about your hospitals. We every year have to fill out a wellness survey from the hospital, and every year I swear at having to do yet another survey. But it is important to try and measure and track and see, and again, identify areas where you can improve. and I'll come back to that and then get some thoughts from the group. The second paper is about teamwork. And, one of my many problems in life is that I'm a hockey fan. I'm an Ottawa Senators fan. And so if you are into hockey, you know the importance of teamwork and picking people for the right jobs, right? You have to have the right people in the right positions. This is a real nice review article. These are all the stressors that everyone here is well familiar with after a year of dealing with COVID, and the stress that has applied to a system that was already incredibly stressed and fragile, right? We've all seen the cracks exposed from this pandemic. There's a long list of things to sort of think about and how to address those areas of stress. I sort of think the recommendations they pull out are, number one, recognize the wins. We need some positives, right? So whether it's thanking someone for developing a new protocol for intubating a COVID patient to getting promoted academically, we need to promote those things and let everyone know about them, right? They talk about a shared mental model. And, for most of us, that's a smaller thing. Like, here's a project about how to move people through urgent care. There's going to be a new job, a new role. Here's what we want you doing, and how to stay on point to that and how it needs repeated messaging. I said stay positive, but this has been a very stressful time for us. So we need to acknowledge the hard parts to our group, the stressors, how we paid for this pandemic, right? They talk about monitoring, and I like this sort of, team performance, the actual situation, where are we at, both from a team, patient, and hospital point of view, right? And then also monitor your teammates. How is everyone doing? And lastly is to plan as best you can. At the start of the pandemic, there was huge concern about intubating COVID patients. There's so much uncertainty. How are we going to do this? We developed a plan. We actually had in situ simulation. We practiced with some of the new things, and we came out the other side. Our stress level had been decreased dramatically because of that planning that went into place. So, when I think they're both sort of well-written review articles. When I think of my time doing the job I have and reading these things, the sort of top five things. So build your team strategically. So get the right people in the right jobs. Don't give, say, patient complaints to someone who's fresh out of practice or fresh into practice, who's younger, or ask them to discipline their colleagues in any way, shape, or form, right? Right people in the right jobs, you're going to find success. And it has to be a job that these people want to do. They talk in one of the review articles about the 80-20 rule and how if you can get people spending 20% of their time doing something that they find particularly rewarding, that's actually enough to keep them engaged in their job. Below 20% overall job engagement really drops. Above 20%, it kind of stays the same. So if you're spending that much time, 20%, doing the thing that you really find rewarding, you're going to put up with the rest of your job. Back to that listening, right, and seeking feedback. What's going on out there? It can be very challenging in a big group to know how everyone's feeling and doing on a day-to-day basis. So you may need to be asking and having people out there looking for feedback for you. Asking them, how's everyone doing in that particular group or that particular cohort? Stay on message. And repeat. One thing I've learned is that, not everyone reads emails. Not everyone remembers how you accomplish this or do that or how you refer to this particular service. And so you're going to need to send that message 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And that's just the reality. And I try not to get frustrated by that. I think that's really important. Be positive. Call people out for doing a good job or accomplishing something or congratulate them. And then acknowledge the hard parts. And recognize that everyone is suffering and pain in some way for what we've gone through over the last year. Never mind what our job is like during normal times. So that's all I'm going to say about those 2 articles. I thought they were both sort of helpful and thought-provoking, nicely written review articles. The first one, a little bit of a big picture organizational sort of approach, probably not super practical for us who have much smaller mandates and much smaller budgets, but I think there's lessons to be learned from both of them. So I'll ask for some people want to chime in with some feedback or questions or ideas. We'll go from there.
Great. Let's feedback, questions, comments on those articles for Eric. There's a few stuff in the chat, so we'll so again we'll turn over to you, Lois.
You wanna...
Sorry, missed someone.
Do you want me to go?
Sure,
Ready?
go ahead, Lois. While Lois is getting the slides up, someone else want to make a comment? I missed it, sorry.
I just had a question from Mike Parsons again.
Go ahead, Mike.
I'm talking a lot today. I just had a question earlier on the wellness side of things. A lot of people were talking about sabbaticals. Now, I think about it in one way here because we've got, I think like Eddie Lang had said, we have GFT full-time faculty where my sabbatical will come from the university and be fully paid that way. I can take a year off if I want to and coordinate it with the clinical side of things. But I don't imagine that's the way it is for everybody. So what different versions do people have? When I think of sabbatical, I think of the version that I have, but I'm sure that's not the same for everybody. And who pays for it?
Yeah, there's all kinds of models out there. I'm sure people will put that in the chat. You're absolutely right, Mike. Some of them are self-funded by departments, you know, that again pay a little less and have a pool and do that. Some will give a kind of small percentage and then you can do your own thing or save up. There's a whole variety of models, but most of them are self-funded. You're absolutely right. The university involved, even universities are getting out of paying for sabbaticals. As you know, they love to give less and less money. Yeah, Eric's is self-funded. Okay, Lois, over to you.
Thanks, Doug. So these articles, I'm going to put them in context first with a little bit of background, and they are about the arts and leadership. And these are the questions that they bring forward. What can the arts do for us, and what can we do in learning with them or using the arts? So in a number of articles I read, they speak about emotional intelligence. So empathy is the ability to be aware of the feelings and emotions of others, and emotional intelligence is when you add that in about yourself. So the 5 of them are listed here. The first 3 are related to our inward looking at ourselves. And the bottom 2, empathy and social skills, are more about how we relate and work with other people. So it takes a technical skill to run a department or to do many of the things that we do in our departments, but it's also the artistic interpretation of that technical skill that counts. So how many variations of Vivaldi's 4 Seasons have you heard? There's a lot. And there are different violin virtuosos. There are different horn players like Doug who can play some instruments, play different pieces better than others. And those are technical skills. And how can they be improved with spending more time with the arts? Great leaders have a high EI, and there's a man named Daniel Goleman. He's written books, he's written articles, and this is what he feels, that EI is the more important piece. And I keep thinking, because I'm from Newfoundland, I keep thinking that's unemployment insurance. So I've had to correct myself with that. But it is the EI that is more relevant, in fact, in good leaders than cognitive intelligence. So the question is, can these skills be learned and developed, and why bother? So in a 2003 Harvard Business Review article, long before Malcolm Gladwell, they speak about the tipping point. And they speak about once you've harnessed the beliefs and energies as a critical mass of people and they're engaged, and this is the phrase, conversion spreads like an epidemic. And I couldn't help but groaning when I heard that in the middle of a pandemic. Anyway, the Harvard Business Review has a number of really interesting articles. Another one from that course or that program or publication is in 2003, again, some older articles. John Cotter, who I mentioned when I spoke a couple of weeks ago. And he speaks about the difference between managers and leaders. And managers promote stability in the face of complexity, where leaders press for change. They have that mystical vision, and they're always about aligning people and saying, what can we change versus how can we cope? And the theory in some of this literature and some of the reading is with a higher EI, you can move mountains with motivating and inspiring people because you're not pushing them in a certain direction by making them doing something. With really good EI, you are actually satisfying their basic human needs to do their job well. They have a sense of belonging, they have a sense of self-esteem, they have a sense of some control over maybe the shifts they're choosing, how the shifts are structured, and their ability to stick to ideals and plans. So what do the arts do for emotional intelligence? So solo ones, as a human said a couple of weeks ago, meditation, mindfulness is hugely valuable in the solo activities such as running. Yeah, you can run in a run club, but it's the running is often meditative, those long runs. Painting, and I know running is sort of exercise, but I'm scooting it in under arts. Painting, writing, textile work, pottery work, any of those things will bring problem-solving aspects, not just to the issue you have in front of you if you're trying to get a particular color or cut a piece of wood, or like Bruce, you cut it wrong and you have to go back and cut it the second or third time to actually make it work. So these problem-solving things in the arts, when we work with our hands, they stimulate our limbic cortex, and I think that they translate back in our day-to-day work. Group activities and arts, as coming up in one of the articles, teaches you when to lead, when to follow, when to weave together. It's increased engagements among people. It is pulling people together, and we are social human beings, or we are social as human beings. And examples of theater, orchestra, choirs, these are the kind of group activities that again can enhance that emotional intelligence. They all increase confidence, empathy, motivation, and that engagement, that delight, that fun of learning something new and incorporating that. There is this really cool website in Spain. And it's called NOMA, and there's this cool little article I found in it. And the website, I'll just read off it, is a website devoted to the relationships and influences among culture, sciences, and technologies. It means habits, lifestyles, communication, art, society, media, philosophy. And that is their kind of tagline. But the website is full of some really interesting outside the box, non-medical articles about and can be interpreted in what we do. So this particular one by this author on the art of emotional intelligence, and that was the title of the article. He feels that everyone is creative and can nurture this creativity. Creativity is an art, yes, but during the expression or creativity of that art, we can find the keys to our problem solving. These creativity is usually associated with curiosity and joy, finishing something satisfying, a little bit of having somebody say, wow, that's really cool, you did a great job there, is very satisfying to our sense of confidence and our ability to create and just be. So emotions cause creativity. Gorgeous sunrises, finally seeing green in the valley here this time of the year. Anything like that can trigger creativity in your particular medium. Do you paint? Do you write a music piece? Do you write poetry? What are the pieces that emotion created with you? But also that creativity and art expression is a way to manage your emotions. So you circle back to being able to get away from a terrible meeting, figure out how to debrief or decongest from a shift you had, and a way to manage some of the emotions that are really challenging: anger, frustration, just plain annoyed, and to try and carve that time out in order to be creative and to use creativity are worthwhile. In this article, he speaks for about 10 minutes, not 10 seconds. And that if you go into an art gallery, you should spend 10 minutes looking at a particular painting, not 10 seconds. And not just passing by the ones you don't like, but looking at it and trying to figure out why you don't like it. And I love going to art galleries. I've never spent 10 minutes looking at a painting, but maybe we should. What could we learn from that? And in this article, he summarizes by saying a powerful tool, the arts are a powerful tool in increasing emotional intelligence abilities and creativity. And basically, art is an essential, not a frivolity. So to the two articles, Michael O'Malley's Every Leader is an Artist, he asks, are the arts relevant to us as leaders? And then he goes on to state 12 artistic criteria to judge a leader. But I would suggest that these are actually criteria to guide ourselves. It's less about judging people, but about using this article and those items identified to say, hey, I'm really comfortable with this, but I'm not doing that very well. So maybe I need to spend a little bit of time over there. There are variation on leadership styles that he mentions. And way back when, again, when I first commented in the first lecture or presentation, I had up to 13 different leadership styles. So he's got 4 here, but he has more fun names on them. So the humanist, the traditionalist, the technician, and my favorite, the shapeshifter. So, you know, he's using creativity, not just in his 12 criteria, but also how he presents the ideas. So the questions I would have for our group out of this presentation or his article, are these criteria reasonable? How practical are they? And can you actually change behavior and personality? So hold that for a sec. We'll go to the second one. And Janina Comboy's How the Arts Help Hone Leadership Skills. So the premise is that we all want to improve our leadership ability. We all want to be better and to, I don't know, be the best, but we all want to be the best that we can be. So can engaging in the arts more make this happen is her question. So she describes how she has this improvisational jazz group for creativity, curiosity, and through the experimentation and the distributed leadership. And that's a key phrase that in that paragraph, and for me out of her article, is this distributed leadership. And she's talking about people putting hats back and forth on who's to play or lead next in this improvised jazz session. But really what we're doing is building trust in some of the other comments that came up today about co-modeling, co-leadership. So we are trusting with distributed leadership, and we are always mentors for people. And we should always be succession planning, because you're never going to be in this role forever. So you should always be thinking about when it's time to go and who's going to pick up from when you put things over. So the conclusion with this was that what she comes up with is that she wants to create intellectually stimulating situations and thought patterns, and she feels the arts can do this, that are emotionally inspiring, and that this then makes us become better leaders. And I comment here on David Walker, and many people will, or some people may know him. He is an emergency room physician in Ontario, and has been involved with the academic and administrative world and leadership world. And he was my staff man when I was a family practice resident in Kingston all those years ago. And I would come to him with this complicated case and would work through it. And he would stand up, and he's a tall man, and he would stand up in this clipped British tone, and he would say, "Right then, showtime." And that phrase has stuck with me over the years because we are a performance art. Everything we do within our leadership skill set at our meetings and within when we go to see patients are all showtime pieces or concepts. So what can you see doing personally or practically with your crew or your team? And what if you've been waiting for an excuse to be able to start to say, you can say, well, I heard about this leadership thing using the arts, and maybe I can use that. So my last comment is Sir William Osler, and I'll call your attention to a couple of lines here. He says, the practice of medicine is an art, not a trade, a calling, not a business. A calling to which your heart will be exercised equally with your head. Often the best part of your work will have nothing to do with potions and powders, but with the exercise of an influence of the strong upon the weak, of the righteous upon the wicked, and I've paraphrased, of you upon admin, and of the wise upon the foolish, of you upon disruptive behavior. And I'll close with my questions that I raised at the end of those two articles, and happy to have any questions.
Fantastic. Let's open it up for discussion. And, you know, Harvard Business Review, if you want to look at some journals outside traditional medicine for leadership, it's fantastic. And it's expensive, but your hospital might be able to may have a subscription. The nice thing about the articles is they're not very long. They're really well written.
Yeah, and they're written for that business model, but it's all transferable. It's you just change some of the words and the concepts. So maybe I'll throw out a question and say, who believes in this stuff? Who is involved in a choir or an orchestra, or has any ideas about whether or not those things translate into being leaders?
Well, I can certainly chime in. As Lois said, I'm a very mediocre trombone player, but I must say, playing in a group with other amateur musicians, like, it is, as you say, Lois, it's really about listening, paying attention, following the group dynamics. Very, very appropriate for leadership and helpful. And especially with jazz, I was taught, like many of you guys that took music, that you always just play the notes, and it's pretty scary not to play the notes that are actually written down. So yeah, it really does push it. Can you see the chat, Lois? Katrina had a comment.
No, hang on. I couldn't there for the moment, but oh, Katrina, that's excellent. So are you doing anything now, like virtual choir practices or anything?
No, it's kind of a sad substitute for a real choir.
Yeah.
I say, like, it's a sad substitute for a real choir. I mean, a real choir is communal, and you come together.
Yeah.
And there's something about the synchronicity of the activity.
Yeah.
So, you know, the Phoenix Chamber Choir, it's an asynchronous choir. So you first by yourself, and then you submit a recording, and they compile it together.
Okay.
So it's like a sad COVID choir.
Yeah. So who else on this kind of screen here has any hobbies that involve their hands? Eric, you're my partner today, so I'll go to you. Anything? Any arts ability or hobbies?
Well, if you count running as an art, then sure.
Yes. Okay. Absolutely.
I do my de-stressing is often with, running, cycling,
Yep.
cross-country skiing, that
Mhm.
stuff.
Okay.
And I do like the solo sort of grind.
Right.
There is clearly something emotional and mental that happens when I'm doing those things. And if I miss them for a while, my crankiness goes way up and my yelling at the TV goes way up and stuff. And
Yes. So I will confess that last year when I spent innumerable hours on a COVID planning for the zone, and Kirk and Doug, you can never tell Dave Petrie and Tanya Penny this, but I made the most beautiful quilt because I had my headphones on in my ears as I listened. And these were massive meetings with like 60 people, and I wasn't a part of that conversation. I was there to listen. And then I started sewing it after I had it cut out. And I was frightened to death that one day somebody was going to say, wait, is that a sewing machine in the background? Right. So, but the piece is, the point is you can incorporate this stuff. Somebody else said cross stitch and rug cooking, TV yelling. I don't think that counts. Kirk, I know you.
Sarah has her hand up if you can't see.
Oh yeah. I gave the quilt to Cheryl. Whose hand is up?
Sarah was up.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, it's me. I'm not sure you'll hear me very well. It says my internet connection's unstable.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
So you hear me?
comments?
Okay, so
Yeah.
I was just gonna say
Now we've lost you.
Can you put it in the chat, Sarah, if you?
Yeah. So Michael, what stringed instrument?
Most of them.
Oh,
Like
wait, now those are guitars in the background there, aren't they?
Yeah, so they're all pretty much the same. You learn to play one.
I'm gonna
you
type
learn
it in
to
the
play
chat.
other.
Yeah.
It was like guitar, mandolin, bouzouki, all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. But when I was reading through the article, I was thinking, like, as a player, you're looking to other people as you're playing. You're not, if you're just being the leader, then you got to be perfect. Everybody's eyes on you. But if you pay attention to your other people, then they can cover up your mistakes. They can help you along.
Yes.
It's more of a team sport. You make a certain move with your arm or your leg, and then you move on to the next part of the song. So it's not all spoken. And I can't play well at any of this. I've just seen other people do this, right?
Yeah.
There's all those kinds of things that cross over.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, this kind of, a lot of these things kind of fit with leadership as well as.
They do. They do. I made this set of curtains once and they were, 8 inches too short. So I cut them apart, put an insert in and brought them down to the right length, right? So there are those kinds of things that you can play around with. And Sarah, I see that you're creative writing and that's fantastic because Doug has said many times how writing is such a reflective exercise and it lets you sort out the threads and puts things in perspective.
Fred here in Victoria. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm just calling in by phone, so I can't tell if other people are chiming in. But if there's time, I have something to share along those lines to riff on writing in medicine and humanities.
Yes.
The med students here and now some of the faculty are doing narrative medicine. I'm not sure if that's been tried anywhere else around the country, but we have this professor, Sarah DeLu, and she brings a lot of evidence-based research to her narrative medicine and how oftentimes it's more purposeful than journaling, where they get you to reflect on an either difficult or positive clinical encounter, and then it's the act of parking that for 2 weeks and then later on going back to your recollection and then doing some mindfulness about there. I've noticed in our island here, there's been a lot of grassroots interest in humanities in healthcare, and so we've got some story rounds going on with the faculty that seem to be really interesting, and there's a growth of trying to bring together a bunch of different specialties. So things like medical anthropology or medical law, or different arts to create this humanities in healthcare department, basically.
That's fantastic. You should look up this NOMA website for sure. You'd find some really interesting things there for that type of conversation. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Doug, I see we're almost out of time, so I'll hand things back to you for closing remarks.
Thanks, Lois. A great discussion. So just really some thank yous. I want to thank our faculty that have really committed, those of all 10 faculty. Some couldn't be at all sessions, but really very committed and involved in all this work. I want to really thank everyone that signed up. Like I said, this is really, we're all learning together. Now you're part of the CAPE leadership community. So what this means is we're going to be calling out to you to really give us feedback. This is our second offering. We had our conference in Mexico, and now we have a virtual meeting where we certainly intend on continuing with our leadership journey, and really will depend on your feedback. Carol Ann has sent that out to you already. That's really important. I want to really thank Carol Ann Lefebvre and Sean Ascaro. They've done a fantastic job in keeping us on track and helping put all this program together in a short time, and for the CAPE board for supporting this work. The question really, I'll turn to Carol Ann again, we're going to capture the chat. We have the website with more materials on it, the recordings. Just Carol Ann, can you just kind of give people some of your feedback in terms of how long that material will be up, and what is the resource going forward in that?
Well, my understanding is it will sit there, and I could be wrong here, but I'll double check, at least a year for reference. And you can find all the recordings. Anybody that hasn't gone looking for it, it's very easy to find. You just log in on the CAPE website as yourself, and you'll find it in the left-hand index, Virtual Leadership Series. And all the session recordings are there, all the articles talked about, the presenters' slides. And if anything else comes up, we'll post it there as well. So yeah, it's a great resource. So make sure you familiarize yourself with it.
Yeah, and we both Eddie and I, a number of people are on the CAPE Leadership Committee. I know they have a meeting tomorrow, actually, and part of the feedback will be, what do we take going forward? Do we have a listserv? How do we keep kind of build this network of leadership? Our plan certainly is to move ahead on that. So anyways, it's also important as leaders to start and finish on time. That's also really important. So I really want to. This has been fantastic. I've learned a lot from every one of you on on the whole group, and it's nice to really finish off with some discussions on creativity. As I've said to many, I think leadership and administration is very much a creative activity, and people roll their eyes a little bit at that, but I hope you'll see that in fact that is true. So anyways, we'll sign off now, and hopefully we can meet in person. I hope you're all signed up for the CAPE meeting coming up. Wonderful program. Centered in Winnipeg virtually, but wonderful program. I'll do a shout out to certainly the wellness track with Rod, and whom has got some great material there, and then lots to interact in. So, okay, well, thanks everyone. Safe evening, and stay safe from COVID.